Thanks for having us on. I'm really excited about this. I'm a firm believer that you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And for everybody to get a window into some of the climbs that these folks have made, I'm excited to just be a part of try to get some of that story out. So what's the goal for today? It's to figure out how we can climb from a salesperson to a sales manager to a leader and beyond. And I think we've got, the air is really thin up there where these 4 are. One thing I know about all 4 of them is they're all honest and they're all humble. So one of the things I asked them to do as part of this panel is to let us behind the curtain on some of those things that have made you successful. I know they didn't get to this level of success because they like talking about themselves, but that is frankly what I'm going to be asking them to do today. So without further ado, let me introduce the 4 panelists. So first off, Tracey Mills from Crowdstrike. She's made the climb to sales VP at one of the fastest growing, most successful cyber companies there is. She's a thought leader in her organization, and she's played a huge role in her org's professional development process. She's actually a thought leader in the partnership that we have with her organization. She's got a great heart, and I love her style. She's honest, she's passionate, and she's there for her people. So Tracey, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Pete.
Awesome. Next, we have Scott Ernst. Scott, I have personally had the opportunity to work with hundreds of high impact business leaders over my time. And Scott is one of the most strategic business minds that I've encountered. But what makes him a unicorn, in my opinion, is he's a salesperson at heart. He'll probably talk more about this, but he actually invested in his own sales development. He spent his own money to try to figure out how to become a better salesperson very early on in his career. And he genuinely wants to help his clients. And as his role of CEO at Drift, he still is a salesperson at heart. So Scott, thanks for joining. Oh, you're on mute, Scott.
Yep, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome, great.
I'm blushing as you make those comments.
Well, thank you. I didn't run any of these by any of these folks ahead of time.
I wish I had it recorded.
My words, okay.
You do, actually.
Karl Watson. Now we go to Karl. Karl, and he's had a lot of leadership roles in his career, but the one that impressed me the most, he was the CEO of the largest cement manufacturer in the United States. When he started in that role, their company was at a $67 million profit loss. Okay, they're in the hole by $67 million. 4 years later, $588 million in profit. And he'll tell you, oh, it's just good timing. Well, good timing would have meant he might have gone from 67 million to even 67 million to 200 million in profit, but it wouldn't have been to 588 million in profit without him leading an organization. He talks about creating a culture of ownership, and that made a massive impact on that business. So Karl, thanks for joining.
My pleasure.
Awesome. Last but not least, Appel. Eric, I've experienced Eric's management style firsthand in his element. Years ago, he actually invited me to his house to attend a sales meeting that he was having with his team. By the way, phenomenal house, but that alone told me this guy can sell, because you see his house and it's like, wow, green egg and all that stuff, which I love. But Eric is a great leader, period. And I don't know that because he told me. I know that because his people told me and continue to tell me. So I think those of us that are in a leadership position, we don't get there unless teams follow us. And I know that's true with all 4 of you. So really excited to get going here today. Those of you in the audience, I've got a little advice for you. Okay, number 1, think about your climb. Those of us that are trying to get better, we get better because we decide to take another step. Okay, we decide to take a step from where we are to where we want to be, whether it's somebody pushing us along or whether we decide to do it ourselves. And when we do that, we're going to constantly look at mindsets that are going to need to shift, behaviors that might need to change, or strategies and tactics that we want to implement. So what I want to do today is try to get some of that out of these 4 individuals and then bring it back to our 1,300 closest friends that are listening to figure out how we can help them with their climb. Okay. Ready to roll, everybody?
Yep.
Yes,
Okay,
sir.
first question. And Tracey, I'll start with you.
Okay.
Let us behind the curtain on one pivotal moment in your climb?
I actually will keep it short with two pivotal moments and break the rules right off the bat. So for me, I went to Boston College Business School, and a pivotal moment for me was taking my organizational behavior class and ethics in business. I didn't realize that being in business meant that you could still be ethical, a good person, doing case studies and having that Jesuit Catholic background, which I am not religious, but it really helped me realize that I could be authentic in who I wanted to be getting into business. So that started the foundational aspect of it, but really getting into leadership meant that I had to believe in myself and had a lot of self-limiting beliefs, getting out of my comfort zone. And I was called, I had been working at Dell for about 20 years, was called with somebody that I had worked with way back in the past, said, there's a manager job. And I said, are you sure it's for me? Do you want me to be the backfill of the person you're actually promoting to manager? And so, I sat through a presentation yesterday with Reshma Sojani. She's the founder of Girls Who Code. And she actually said men apply for jobs where they meet 60% of the qualifications, and women need to have 100% of the qualifications, and that was 100% me. So I got out of my comfort zone. I was worried I wasn't going to be authentic again. I wasn't going to be able to fit in being a mom, and finding that right sort of Sherpa to get that climb to follow that made me believe in myself was really important.
That's awesome, Tracey. I love that story. One of the things that you mentioned there, the authenticity part, can you share with me how that plays into your leadership style? Because I think that's probably something you said early in your talk there, but I don't want to overlook that.
No, it's definitely, I think, pivotal to who I am. I always feel like I show up the same way, whether I'm a mom, whether I'm at work, whether I'm with a friend. And it is sort of allowing myself to integrate all those roles into one person, as opposed to showing up fake. I was always worried that getting into leadership meant I had to sort of play the game or tell the story, or not be able to truly work in a fashion that I wanted to work. Some of the things that I implement kind of across the board is that a carrot works better than a stick. Learned that very, very early on. So actually, using positive reinforcement as opposed to a mandate, no matter what I do, and that everybody wants choice. People do things for different reasons, and you sort of have to put yourself in other people's shoes, have empathy when you show up, and give people the ability to do things in the way that they want to do it, with a little bit of guidance. Obviously, there's a coaching around that. You've got to obviously be there for recommendations and thought leadership, but I'm helping, not necessarily directing.
Thanks, Tracey. Karl, I'll go to you on that, and I'm curious, as you tell a pivotal moment, if you could comment on early on when you get that first leadership role. How does that authenticity play a role when you don't actually know everything yet? How hard is it to be a leader when you're still learning? And how do you allow the authenticity to come out in that situation?
Yeah, mine was in my early 20s. To say that I was average at everything I ever did in my entire life might have been an overstatement. I was an average student, I was an average athlete, I was an average son, I was an average brother. And then I was actually an average salesperson in the southwest coast of Florida, where you live, Pete. And we had a business over there, and it was not considered a core business of the company I worked for, and they were actually going to sell it. We had a succession of two managers that came through there and left, and they weren't going to put a third over there because they were going to get rid of that part of the business. And it's almost like for people with gray hair like me, remember that old Life cereal commercial about Mikey? Yeah, let's let Mikey try it. Well, let's let Karl try it, because there's nothing to lose. And they gave me ownership of the business. And it's not too much to say that my life changed completely in one day. I went from being averagely committed to 100% committed, to the point where I actually put a cot in my office and slept there because I didn't want to drive the 30, 45 minutes from Bonita Springs back to Fort Myers. And it was ownership. the concept of ownership is a drug that I have found in working on 3 continents and in multiple countries. That is a universal drug. If you can give somebody at a very young age the ability to own something, it makes all the difference. And if you have somebody who is humble and truly has some self-confidence, meaning they're not afraid to ask, it's not a bad thing to put somebody in a leadership position where they don't have all the answers. As long as they're willing to ask and the organization is willing to help, that's a fantastic combination to give a young person the chance to own something. And even if that's not really owning something, because we were a $1 billion company and all that sort of stuff, I literally didn't have Karl Watson on the checkbook. I felt like it was mine. From the safety of the employees to generating the revenue, to delivering the customer service, to working on the equipment, to making sure that at the end of the day, there was an actual profitability of the organization. It was the most life-changing experience I ever went through from a professional standpoint.
Karl, I appreciate that. Jeff Pankoff earlier, he talked about the super rep syndrome when basically the manager takes over and does the job of the people on the team. I think that ownership concept is interesting, but think about also, how can we allow our reps to maintain some ownership, even within the context of their role, right? The minute we start playing super rep, that goes away. So I was glad Jeff brought that up earlier. And Karl, I'm curious, what, if you can give me in like 30 seconds or less, like why did that switch flip for you to all of a sudden say, I own this? Like what happened there?
I don't really know. I don't really know. But it did. And I'm not alone. I have given that opportunity to so many people across the United States, Asia, and Oceania, that it's the same. People who really want to achieve, if they have the ability to own something, they do. But I had this one little pithy saying that I use with managers and salespeople. I advise, you decide. So I'll give you advice, but I'm not going to decide for you. You have to own whatever you have, whatever your position is, and you need to take it and run with it. So there's a big difference between advising and deciding. And so it's important as managers that you can advise, and you should be a coach, an advisor, a teacher, but you can't decide. They have to own it, good or bad, and learn from the mistakes or failures or successes.
Love it, Tracey. Maybe we'll come back to you in a minute on that, because I know you like to give your folks freedom to fail.
I was like, I have something for Karl. Yeah,
ahead,
I think
Tracey.
that he probably doesn't realize that somebody like truly believed in him, and that was what it really took. That when you truly believe you can fall and fail, I think it gives you a little bit more need to sort of prove them right.
Love it. Okay, Eric. Thanks, Tracey, for that. Eric, give me your pivotal moment.
Yeah. I'll give one that I hope folks can relate to, that are aspiring first line leaders out there that have a desire to expand beyond being an individual contributor and make it to a first line leader. For several years, from my perspective, I felt like I was almost entitled, like I'd done the job and I should get promoted. And I kept kind of wondering, why it wasn't happening, and I was perhaps pushing too hard. But then I got some advice that just to continue to be great at what you're doing right now, and then the right opportunity will present itself. And so if I think about a pivotal moment, I don't think, pivotal moments are just luck. And as much as Karl, although I love the humble perspective, I think there's preparation, and I think there's obviously good fortune that goes into it. But I was presented with a scenario that a lot of people on this call could probably appreciate. So I actually remember it in 2010, and I was with McAfee, the very large enterprise antivirus, big consumer brand. And we had our sales kickoff. We had 2,500 people at the sales kickoff. And we were told that they were going to choose one salesperson out of that 2,500 to get up in front of 2,500 people and give the corporate pitch in less than 20 minutes. And so the idea was that they wanted to make sure that all 2,500 people were ready to go. Well, about 3 days before the event, our executive vice president of sales Joe Sexton came up and said, "Hey, Eric," in a Kentucky drawl, said, "Hey, you know that whole thing about getting drawn out of a hat at random? Well, it turns out it's going to be you. So I suggest you do it." Well, so my first thought was, holy crap. I'm in front of 2,500 people, and you talk about camping and climbing. And I like to think of myself as a climber, but that was going to be on some very unsteady rock. And then to boot, 3 days later, I woke up with 102-degree fever and thought, gosh, is this the right day to climb? And as good luck and fortune would have it, got on stage and gave perhaps one of the best presentations I'd ever given. Up to that point, I consider myself a very average presenter. But from that point forward, because I was prepared, took the risk, it worked, gave a good presentation. And then from that point forward was given many opportunities to progress my career. And just, I look back upon that and I just feel so unbelievably grateful and fortunate that I was given that opportunity. And then I'm glad that for that moment in time, I was able to seize it. So I hope that, I don't know if anybody's pivotal moments will be just like that, but I hope if given it, you have the opportunity to seize it.
Yeah, those 5-second of courage moments, they're so hard to do, but the minute it happens, it's like your comfort zone bubble just bursts and expands, and now you get these new normals, and it's like, oh, cool. How can I go seek out something else that's going to make me uncomfortable? How's that going to help me? And when you get thrown into that, whether you wanted to or not, it's definitely going to happen. So that's pretty awesome. Okay, Scott, last but not least, pivotal moment.
Thank you. So I was thinking about this as we're going through these conversations. And I think, first of all, this idea of getting comfortable with being uncomfortable is a really strong indicator of your ability to find those pivotal moments. So think about anything that's happened to you. When you stretch yourself a little bit, that pit in the stomach, feeling that you get the sweat that you get on your hands, means that you're getting out of your comfort zone and your body's reacting to that. And the natural thing is to revert back. But if you can have this outlook of abundance and embrace that discomfort, whether it's giving the pitch deck to the 2,500 people with a fever, or whether it's asking who is now your wife the first time you want to dance, where there are all of that potential for rejection, and being open to that is remarkably powerful in your own career. So I had one of those pivotal moments. So pretty early in my sales career, I was in the healthcare business and was a full line rep, meaning I represented all the products across the portfolio. And at a national sales meeting, I was given an opportunity to take a leadership position and to be an expert on a new device that we were launching. And that would imply or infer that I would spend a whole lot of time outside of my territory, not doing things that were making my commission check, but were bettering what we were doing. And because I had that outlook of abundance and was going to be an expert in the field that I didn't know a whole lot about at the time, it completely changed the trajectory of my career. So being open to the possibility of getting out of my comfort zone made a step function in what I would do. And I look back at that point and say, we all have a series of inflection points along our life, along that graph. And I look at that point in time and can point specifically at it and say, had I said no, had I said I was too busy, or I didn't know enough about the product, frankly, I think I would be in a very different position than I am today now, more than 25 years later. So get comfortable with being uncomfortable, get out of your comfort zone, because when you do that, really good things can happen. But you need that outlook of abundance to be open to those kinds of things.
Okay. If I'm learning one thing here, it's do what other people are unwilling to do, which sounds to me like getting up in front of 2,000 people, which is what we're all doing right now, ironically. But that's basically what I'm hearing is if you do that, you're going to get promoted. Is that pretty much the takeaway from the first couple of minutes here? I know that's simplifying things, but Scott, so let me ask you this, and Scott, I'll let you lead us off on this topic, but I'd like to get everybody's take on this. You mentioned what's possible versus what you did on purpose. So you're going in a certain direction on purpose, and you might be so tuned in on going in that direction versus keeping the blinders off to figure out what's possible. How do you manage that dichotomy of having a direction, having a goal, but then also being open-minded enough to pivot when you need to? Like, what, give me a sense, because I do think most leaders have learned that dichotomy, and they can rise above that dilemma and then look down on it and try to figure it out. But can you give me a sense for what that means?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, you need to have the end goal in mind, right? So we had a good conversation with Tracey earlier this week about how much do you surrender to serendipity? And there's basically nothing in my life that I leave for chance, right? It's just not who I am. It's not how I'm wired. And I believe everything needs to be in context to the vision and the purpose that you're trying to do. So, if you want to get somewhere fast, you need a map and a compass, right? But no journey is a straight line. So how do you figure out when it's time to be open to a different path that can get you to that same end goal? So the way that I structure that and think about that, and whether it's about my career or about anything that I do, what I need to lock in on what that North Star is. And then whether I'm taking a divergent path, again, nothing is a straight line, recognizing that, that as long as I'm working toward that end goal, then I'm kind of in the success quadrant, right? Because I know I'm going to get to that goal. I think you get into trouble when you're open to possibilities, when you don't have any framework to put against that to say, is that in line with what I need to do? So
Okay.
if I'm going to explore something else, right? Think about doing something different that may be outside of my comfort zone, then I need to know that it's in service to where I want to get to long term. And in my mind, there's always a 5-year horizon. I think of the world in 5-year cohorts. And what am I going to do for the next 5 years to get me to the next 5 years after that?
Thanks for that, Scott. Okay. Anybody else want to add anything to that?
I think, between Scott and Tracey, there's kind of this middle norm of, from what they were talking about. You guys didn't have the opportunity to hear the dialogue earlier, but that continually focused on the North Star versus being willing to veer off, where appropriate, or where it sometimes take you. I think, but for me, and I bet these guys, all have different perspectives and are all very, very successful. Balance is key. I think for me, it's worked out to understand what my values are, stay true to those values, stay true to what's most important, but then being open to adopting as circumstances present themselves. It could be that you are heading down a path and you think you are going to become senior vice president of sales in this organization, but something else has presented it over here that you need to be really thoughtful about that opportunity. Not saying jump at the first opportunity to jump, but I do think it's okay to continually be learning, continual adopting, if you will. So there's that key balance. So I think Scott, you were hitting on that as well. But staying true to your values, what you know is most important, but then being open to changing as needed.
So Tracey, like, one of your strengths is staying open-minded to what's possible, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of it just has to do with my main goal, and my North Star is my family. And so it's hard because I think as a mom, you have such a draw to wanting to be at home, to do all the things for your kids, and you want to be perfect at that role and then also perfect at work. And so having the drive and the vision doesn't always work because you have so many veers in the road. You get pregnant, you take maternity leave or not, you I don't know, so many. There's just sort of check upon check around, I think, being a little bit more flexible and figuring out that my instinct was probably my number one thing I had to learn with time to trust, and that my core values of grit and positivity and being grateful for where I am. So, there's a lot of different pieces of the, both folks who've spoken up so far, which is I still have a vision and a goal, but there's probably a little bit more, I don't want to say luck, because there's a lot more to luck than just luck, but it is absolutely working smarter and not harder, which I know is one of the Sandler goals. And then also a lot of just sort of faking it till you make it, which again is another Sandler goal. Those two things to me just resonate just very strongly. And I knew I wanted to be successful, but I didn't want to be that salesperson. And I didn't necessarily know that being a leader meant that I could lead a team in a way that I wanted to lead, which might be different than I've been, led in the past.
Okay, Tracey, thanks. Karl, when you had some adversity, right? Early in that stint when you were minus 58 million, 59 million, 67 million. I'll get my numbers right.
A lot.
Yeah, a lot. Obviously, you're taking over in a position where there's some adversity happening there. How do you allow a positive mindset to exist inside of adversity like that? How do you instill that in your team when there's problems, but obviously you don't get out of that if the mindset won't allow you to? So can you let us behind the curtain on that a little bit?
There was not a single doubt in my mind we were going to get to where we got to. I knew what it took. I knew what the playbook was. It was just executing on it. And I think you have to model that behavior. No matter how dark the day looks at the time, there's a sunrise coming. That sounds awfully odd, but it's true. I mean, and so if you have and vision a lot of times is an overused word. I mean, it's easy to pontificate a grand vision if you don't have the actual executable steps to get there. But you lay out a path forward. You say, this is what we're going to do. This is when we're going to do it. This is how we're going to measure it. And then you are you spread the message far and wide, and you repeat the message over and over and over again. And you have a communicable story that you tell. I read one place one time, I forget who said it. It says that when you think that you're going to throw up the next time you say it, that's the first time they heard it. And so you have to say it over and over and over and over again, and to get everybody repeating the same song, and the results come.
I think one thing I was going to add to Karl's comments there, which were great, is as leaders, your team looks to you when you receive tough news, or when you're going towards a quarterly goal and a deal falls out, or there's lots of different situations that present itself. But to remain steadfast, as Karl was saying, I think to remain positive in tough times is something that sounds easy to do, but is really important, because not only do you need to your behavior need to direct your own attitude, it's important that others see you behaving and acting in a way that personifies positive leadership. I often did not do that. And after that, you feel, I wish I would have reacted in a different way. But when you do react in a way that remains steadfast and positive, it's amazing how others around you will react to even challenging news.
I'm very good at
authenticity and
not where I read it. I read somewhere where the leaders are supposed to breathe in stress and breathe out calm. I mean, so you sort of you do take that on for the organization. Troubled times, you have to breathe in the stress of it, the anxieties of it, but you can't breathe it out.
Right.
You have to breathe
So
out.
when in the leadership training, Tracey, I'll come to you in a second, but I'm curious, like when we all had our emerging leader training and they were putting us in a room and teaching us how to be a leader before we got the job, which by the way never happens. But let's say it did happen. Is there a chapter on that? Like you're not allowed to show the stress outwardly, that you have to take it in, deal with it yourself, and be a shield for your people? Like nobody ever told me that. That was never in the training. Like, but that's huge. It's such a huge point, Karl. I appreciate you bringing that up. It's great. Tracey.
Yeah, I agree 100% with what Eric and Karl just said. But I also think that there's a bit of acknowledgement as well that comes into play, of acknowledging where other folks might have some fear and saying, I have a little bit of that too. I think that, again, that shows up as the authenticity. You definitely don't want to be like, the sky is falling or the building is burning and you're running out. But at the same point, I think acknowledging where some of the struggles are and why people are concerned, but then giving them the 3 points in a very succinct, clear fashion of what to look for in the future to be different and why things are going to be brighter, I think is really important. And I think, again, succinct leadership is clear. If you've figured it out in your mind, as Karl said, he didn't have a doubt in his mind, which is awesome. That meant he knew what he was going to do, and he just has to make sure to reiterate that over and over and over again so that people feel more comfortable.
And to
Tracey,
some degree, I think it's the courage to stay on the throttle when the things start to get hard. So Karl had this absolute conviction that he could do what he needed to do in the business and get it where it needed to be, right? So, but there are clearly points along that journey when things are harder and more difficult than you thought. But having the confidence and the courage to stay on the throttle, to get enough data, to get the proof points that you need and the proof points that the rest of the organization needs to see, to have that same reason to believe that you do, is really important. Now, the balance then becomes, how do you then get enough signal to recognize that it's time to change the process? And we're always kind of in this dynamic of change management, but we need to stay on that throttle long enough to see the result. And if you believe in the process that you're running, if you believe in the plan that you've created, and if you believe in the team that you've built, you need to let all of those things have enough time to show the results. And that's where the courage comes in.
Scott, thanks. Especially now with this instant gratification world we're living in, it's hard to stay focused on whatever it is you're going to get, because you're going to be chasing purple squirrels all over the place. There's so much distraction out there. And I do think having that vision, that mission to drive us in a certain direction, and the positivity, like so far, we've talked about ownership. We've talked about getting comfortable being uncomfortable. We talked about positive belief systems. Like, I don't think it was any accident that y'all went to the attitude piece first. I think that's huge. I think we didn't guide it that way. It's just the way y'all took it. But let's go to behavior for a minute. I'll tell you a quick story. When I got my first technology sales job, not my first leadership job, but my first technology sales job, I went into my boss's office and he had a whiteboard in there, and I put his name and I put my name, and then that was it. And then every morning I saw who got in the office earlier. If I got in the office earlier, I got a check mark. If he got in the office earlier, he got a check mark. And then we started competing against that over the years. And now that guy's one of my best friends, and he was my business guy, it's George, right? That was my, and he's the one that promoted me into my first management job 22 years ago. And so there is an element of behavior that we would want to exhibit if we wanted to keep climbing. I'm curious if there's something you could point to that you look for in your people in that behavior bucket, that okay, that's a climber. I can tell this person is acting a certain way, doing certain things. Tracey, I'll start with you. Does anything come to mind there on the behavior bucket?
To me, it's creativity, like thinking outside of the box, like seeing a problem, being able to question what that problem is. Somebody who has the self-confidence to say, I respect what you're saying, but I don't necessarily believe or agree. And being able to come up with like alternative ways to solve a problem. I just love, again, going back to my parenting, analogy, which is, I love teaching my kids to be able to say to me, I don't 100% agree. Me being able to bite my tongue, because it's a lot easier just to be like, you're wrong, go to your room, but really truly listen. And I love what comes out of their mouth sometimes. It's just pausing and listening and giving everyone, the people that work for me and as well as my kids, the space to be able to speak their creativity, respect it, and then have a collaborative debate over it.
Yeah. So let me make sure I understand. So if your people come to you with a problem, that's one thing. But if they come to you with a problem and they actually have a solution to the problem, that's what you're looking for with creativity?
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Yeah.
Love it.
I think
Cool.
it's almost more, it's more critical thinking right, is that key component or that superpower that we're looking for, right? Like, so it's in exactly, Tracey, it's exactly what you described, but I would just characterize it as that critical thinking, looking for the alternative path, right? When you're locked in on making a decision and there's only one, and you get yourself locked into this mode of only one choice, it's really hard to optimize within that range. But if you can expand the choice set, then it opens up all kinds of opportunities for you. So whether it's that critical thinking or, again, this idea of this outlook of abundance, I think are two things that I look for in the behaviors of people on our team, right? Like, so how do they expand the problem set to find new solutions? And how do they approach it with an outlook that is, there are always more than one choice. There's more than one option. There's more than one way to do things. Then you get this dynamic within the group which is really hard to replicate in any other way.
So if that's the way you manage, how do you look at failure? Because it's going to happen. If you're pivoting, we know it's going to happen. Like, how do we make sure our people feel safe enough to actually drive themselves into a ditch every once in a while? Like, because we're supposed to create the lanes, but we're also supposed to let them drive the car, as Dave Mattson says, right? But every once in a while, they're going to drive the car and not know what they're doing. So how do we instill that safety net to know that it's okay to fail?
You know, it's interesting because the easiest thing to always say is, if you're not failing, you're not trying. But I think it's okay. One of my favorite sayings that I've always tend to lean on is a saying that it says, life rewards action. And because you can sit and you can pontificate and you can just think till you're paralyzed, or you can act. And I think what you have to be comfortable with, though, is sometimes when you act, you're going to fail. For me, I'd rather see someone acting, pushing, driving, and then perhaps failing than someone just thinking forever. And then perhaps by the time they finally act, yes, they're successful, but man, maybe there's 95 other times they could have been successful as opposed to just that one time. And so I'm okay with it. I'm okay with the failures, the losing, as long as they're moving, they're acting, and they're demonstrating action. Now you got to make sure it's within the bounds that you want to set for them, and that you say, here are my expectations. But as long as they're sort of within that realm, it's okay to go out of bounds every once in a while. I'm okay with it. What drives me crazy is just the lack of action.
Eric, thanks for that. So you have a mission, you have the goal, the North Star, whatever you want to say, and you've given them the principles, basically the lanes, then it's up to them to act. And if they do that, that's going to put them in a better light. And I would venture to guess that the four of you did that, which is partially why you're sitting where you are right now on your climb. So, okay.
It's okay to fail, but it's not okay to fail at the same thing twice in a row. Right? Yeah. So I think that's the idea, right? Because like to some degree, the only way that you learn is through failure, right? But you can't fail at the same thing over and over. Then you've got a habitual problem that you need to act on, right?
You also can't deny that you did fail, which bugs me more when they fail and don't admit it. That's
absolutely. Well, that's self-awareness as well, too.
That's
right?
Self-awareness, a little bit of humility maybe needs to be there. All that.
I don't know. It's interesting. In theory, yes, Scott, you have to learn from your failures for sure, and then perhaps try to act differently based on what you learned. One of my favorite stories that came from this weekend was the Detroit Lions offensive lineman who got his first start after never having made it past the practice squad on 27 NFL teams.
Yep.
And he failed over and over. He kept getting cut. He kept getting cut. He kept getting cut. He kept getting pushed to the practice squad, but he just kept going. And then Sunday he started for the Lions. I'm not even a Lions fan. I live in Dallas, Texas, for God's sakes. But that like stole the show for me. Was this guy that kept getting cut, but he just never stopped. He just kept acting. So, you know.
Yeah, and my guess is in that case, those 20X teams that he went for, there were successes within that. Like, so he probably got a little further along every time, or worked on his different technique every time and got better as a player. And I think what that's a statement to is, again, this commitment and the courage to keep pressing on the vision. He had a very clear vision that he wanted to make it to the NFL, and he wasn't going to let 23 teams tell him that he's not going to go do that. But my guess is that there were a series of micro failures and successes every point along the way, and that his pull technique, right? I have a little bit of a point of view on this. His pull technique got better every team he went to, or he learned a little bit more at every team he went to, and and I think I know who you're talking about. Good for him to make that happen.
Okay,
Hey, Keith, there's one thing I was just going to say real quick. The thing that comes to mind for me is a TED talk that I listened to probably I was going to say 5 months ago, maybe a year ago. It's a woman talking about the education system and the strongest predictor for success. And she talks about grit. It's Angela Duckworth did the presentation, and it's just interesting how you can see success and predict success at a very young age at school and take it all the way to, what everybody's talking about here, which is truly grit, which is a unique word to describe because it sort of blends all of the three things, a little bit of technique, a little bit of behavior, a little bit of attitude, all combined together just to keep going and going and going. It's a little bit of learning, but just showing up the next time without a crappy attitude is really, helps you succeed.
Okay, you brought up football, so I'm gonna throw something at you here. So there's this military term called the OODA loop, OODA, observe, orient, decide, and act. Okay, and I'll just lay my cards out here. So Tom Brady is by far the best person at doing that. He wasn't the most athletic person, but he made decisions faster than anybody, got rid of the ball faster than anybody. So he was deciding and acting very fast because his observations were really good, and he oriented to what was going on really well. So if we're going to do what you all said, which is do stuff, it means you're deciding, you're making a decision to do something, right? I'm curious what your thoughts are on the actual decision-making process. Like, how do you measure if yourself or your people are good at making decisions? Like, where does that play into everything when it comes to being a good leader?
It's interesting because you let some people, sorry, I'm going to let Karl go.
No, I'm just trying to answer the question. I mean, how to understand if they're making good decisions or not.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of us here, the folks that are in sales, like our whole goal in life is to enable other people's ability to make decisions. So we're not here to convince anybody of anything. We're here to enable somebody's ability to decide, and they're doing it because they're going to be better off if that happens, regardless of how that outcome impacts you as a person, right? So I think just in general, I think as salespeople, we want to be curious about the decision-making process. But when you take that from a leadership angle and you're trying to figure out, okay, because leaders, that's all we do all day. We're constantly either deciding something or deciding not to decide something so somebody else can do it. Like, that's basically what we do all day. So how do we hone that with our people? How do we get them to be better at the actual art of deciding?
I think they have to want to first. I mean, truly, Pete, you say that all the time in the Sandler training. Like, there's a time where you can see when someone wants to get better and care, which is when it's the perfect time to get in as a coach. And then there's other times where they think that they're right. And, no matter what you say, it's not necessarily going to work. You're going to have to let them fail and then come up with maybe how they could have done it better with a little bit of advice on your part, I guess.
Okay, I love it. So make sure that there's a want there. They're not shoulding on themselves. I said should, by the way, to the Sandler marketing folks. They're not shoulding on themselves. They want to do something, which means their decision-making process is going to be oriented in a better place. Love it. What else? What else can we look for to hone in on ourselves or our people's decision-making process?
I think
It's a very interesting question.
unpacking-
I haven't really thought about it, but I mean, off the top of my head, it's really two broad things. One, I'm a big believer that the means do not justify the ends. You have to do things the right way. And is the decision uphold to the values of the organization you work for? And two, have you advanced the ball forward? Speaking of football, have you advanced the ball forward? Doesn't have to be 50 yards, but are you advancing the ball forward to the organization's objectives, but doing it in the right way? And if you're doing that, those are probably good decisions. The best decisions, well,
Okay,
that's what coaching is for, and that sort of stuff. It's that feedback loop. But certainly is a good decision if you done it within the values of the organization, and two, as it moved the agenda forward.
Okay, so the goal is clear. You've got the environment figured out. There's the right foundation in order to do so, and if that's in play, then you're good. Cool. So then, when Scott, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, we think about the outcome, and you're judging things on whether it's success or failure by the outcome, right? So chances are you're not analyzing the good outcomes, right? Like, all right, that's easy to celebrate. Everybody's happy there. What you're trying to decompose as a manager is when that decision, what were the underlying assumptions that led you to the path that ended up with the wrong decision? So if the underlying assumptions are reasonable and thoughtful, then there's a whole series. Like, so if you go from that success criteria or that decision, positive output, great, move on, although we probably as managers should deconstruct those as well. But then when there's not the right decision made or not the right output, go back one level earlier and understand what were your assumptions going into that, and were they appropriate? Because if the assumption was wrong, I assumed that I was talking to the authority or power or whoever else. Well, maybe that wasn't the case. So I think always when the outcome is not what you want, go back one level earlier in the process and try to unpack it from that point of view, because you may get a lot of directional signal about what was positive or negative about that situation.
Scott, I love that. And the sales process we talk about, it is definitely linear, and there's no silver bullet at the end of the process. There's no like ninja move to get the thing to close. It's what you did that led up to that. So if you can be honest with yourself and go back, I mean, my favorite Sandler rule is when your foot hurts, you probably stand on your own toe. I'm sure my clients have heard me say that over and over and over again. Well, why? Because it means that we can keep getting better if we take our foot off our own toe. And if we can't have enough intellectual humility to go back and know that we messed up, then we're going to keep repeating the same mistake, Scott, like you said earlier. So, okay. So we've got, let's see, maybe 14 minutes left. Mike, is that right? Mr. Montague, 14 minutes left. So let's go to like strategies, tactics real quick. We've hit that a little bit, but it's through a mindset lens, if you will. But let's make this real specific to a sales career, and then that first promotion to manager. Okay. Is there a specific strategy or tactic that you think would serve that first time manager well when they get into that new role? And I'll go with Eric.
Okay. You know, when I look back, part of when it's really, really difficult to be a leader when you're not an appointed leader. Meaning you haven't gotten the promotion, but yet you need to demonstrate as though you should get that promotion. And so that's really, really hard, because you want to be seen in that way. And if I think back to what I've seen others perhaps do that get them to that level, and because you look at what would I want if I were going to promote somebody, and so you start to see those people that are embodying those actions and those behaviors that you would want in a leader. And so I think it's really, really important when you think about, maybe this is, techniques are, before you're a leader, act like a leader. Be a team player, be humble, be willing to do things that others on the team are not willing to do. Be the best at your current position. I've had the opportunity to, I don't know that I'm the best mentor, but I've gotten asked to do it a lot of times, and they want to get into leadership. And one of my first questions is, well, are you great at what you're currently doing? If you're not great at what you're currently doing, probably going to have a hard time promoting you. But if you're great at what you're currently doing, you're willing to serve others, you're humble, and you're a team player, well, now all of a sudden you're a leader. And now it's just a matter of getting that promotion, and it will happen. So that would be my advice to those that want to move into leadership, is act like a leader before you are a leader.
Thanks, Eric. Anybody else want to comment?
I'll add on. I think that the toughest thing for me was to have tough conversations. Being able to sort of understand that I might be frustrated in something, pause, figure out what I'm frustrated with, and then have a really tough conversation. I think that we avoid tough conversations. We sort of prioritize the easier tasks. We like to praise someone as opposed to giving constructive feedback. And I think that also means that you have to accept it on the other side as well. So, I love to say, after we have this conversation, I am absolutely open for you to tell me what you think, I could be doing better as well, or differently, because I think everybody's perspective is important. But tough conversations just in life as a whole, I think are the ones that are the most important ones to have in the right mindset. I guess you got to prep for that. You got to be calm, cool, collected, and being able to be articulate, around what you want to message.
Yeah, if the communication is not there on the tough stuff, then how, but it is hard, Tracey. Like, one of the things I appreciate about you is when we've messed something up in our partnership, which does, occasionally happen, you're let us know. It's but you're doing it from a place to try to make us both better. So, and if you lead like that, your people have to respect that. And if they can do the same thing, I'm sure the respect gets reciprocated. So thanks for that. That's great. Okay.
I think Eric
Karl
said something that was insightful, that when you have to be very good at what you do, but that can also be a detriment to when you're the first time leader. There's a book called Leadership Pipeline, and it shows like a series of 45-degree angles. And you go from low competence to high competence in what you do. And as an individual contributor, you're very high competence, you're great at what you do. And then you make a turn. And all of a sudden, you're low competence at being a leader, because now you're managing others. And everything you did to be successful in managing yourself is not how you're going to be successful in managing others. And having the humility to understand where you are, and the self-confidence to ask for help. And I read somebody in one of the chats said you have to model people, find people who are actually good at it, and go model them. Sometimes mentorship programs I'm not a big fan of, because I got assigned a couple terrible mentors before. And oh geez, I've been assigned to you. Ugh, I don't want you as my mentor. But where I've had great mentorships, where I found out somebody who said, that's who I want to know, that's who's good at it. And I went after them, not waiting for the organization to give me one. And so you go find people who are good at it, and you be aggressive, and you go ask them, because nobody's not going to want to help you. There's not been a person in the world that's been asked for help and says, oh no, please don't ask my advice. I don't want to share any. That's probably a statement that's never been said.
Karl, I'm really glad you brought that up, because the mentor, when Sandler talks about the 4 leadership roles, you've got coach, mentor, trainer, and supervisor. And I saw in the chat, somebody said, not all managers are leaders, which is true, because they spend all of their time in that supervisor bucket. The mentor bucket is the only one that is decided by the mentee. Like, we have positional authority as a supervisor. To some extent, we have positional authority as the coach, because we've been assigned that role. But mentor, it's almost like, if you don't do what Karl just said, you're losing out. There are so many people out there that would want to give you advice. Part of my favorite part of the week is when somebody comes and asks me a question that's outside of the task at hand. That's really fun for leaders to talk about things that are different than what's on the whiteboard. So if we're not doing that, we're losing out for sure. That's a great strategy, Karl, to get yourself a mentor. Love it. Okay, we've got time for one more technique or strategy. And let's do this. Let's shift to, okay, now I'm managing managers. Okay, the climb is gone up a little bit. And now we're managing managers. Anything you can give us there that's a little different?
Oh, I think it's the rope to hang yourself. It's a little bit at the beginning. And once you get some managing managers, you have to give them the ownership. I keep saying that over and over and over again. It's my core belief in organizational design. The ownership to make the box bigger. And every step in the organization, the box gets bigger. Eric said something that as long as you're acting within that box, just go for it. And actually, there's books written, one of Levers of Control, that the more people know where the boundaries are, the more freedom they have. When they don't know where the boundaries are, the less freedom they have. And that sounds sort of backwards, but it's very true. So you just have to keep expanding the boxes, very clear, know where their limits of authority are, and expect them to deliver massive results within those boundaries. And then going back to get advice, but you have to decide. You have to own it, good and bad. You have to own it.
So
I always like to say, I was just going to say, I always like to say, you'll know where the boundary is when I tell you. Like, I prefer people to be super creative and my boundaries be pretty far out. And when like they cross them, and again, sales is a little bit different than probably other parts of the organization. But I love everybody knowing that they pretty much have free reign within certain things that I expect. And it's very rarely that I say, "Oh, you shouldn't have done that." But I'd rather be that type of manager than the one that has so many rules that they can't get out of.
Tracey, I'm guessing that some of the roles that you got promoted into, the boundary expanded a lot larger than what you thought at the time you wanted to take on. Right?
Yeah.
Especially
for sure.
because so how do you get the belief system to know that you can start filling out a bigger box?
I think it's from above. It's making sure that the person who either promoted you or you're reporting to is giving you that same level of ability. I know that I always like to say, I like to be running, not walking, not skipping, just sort of like running, because that's where you get the success. Good enough is good enough. And we talked about it earlier. It's like 80% of the way there, get you there. Usually it's just take that chance, fail, move on, be creative. And I think that, again, it just goes to who you report to and what the organization allows that you're working for. So much of it is from the top down.
Okay, well, okay. I'm going to end with this one question. I'll ask you each to answer it. Give me what you got, and maybe 10 words or less, if you can. So, what is your leadership superpower? 10 words
for
or
me,
less.
it's scalability. I am equally as comfortable being in Washington, D.C. On Monday, and that same night being on the factory floor. And I love both environments, and I feel like I can relate in both environments and having that scalability.
Okay, awesome. Scalability. Tracey.
I'm going to say mine is my intuition and instinct. Just being able to trust what I believe, pause, and really truly figure out what I think is true, and then act on that action. Not what I think somebody else is going to do, not what I think I should be doing, but really truly what comes from within. And so it's that intuition and instinct.
Okay, love it. Scott.
So I think it's some combination of optimism, empathy, and humility, right? All kind of packaged together against, a very much a shared vision and a shared mission. So again, in the few minutes that we spend together, you hear from me, it's all about the North Star and the destination. And, that's my superpower, is being able to think about that and describe that and try to get a movement toward that. And the only way you do that is being wired with being optimistic, being empathetic, because every journey is hard, and then having the humility to know that we don't have all the right answers and we're all just trying to make an impact.
Thanks, Scott. Eric.
Yeah, for me, it's probably authenticity. I'm very open with my team about my values, faith, my family, and being committed to winning. And I let them know that they can always call me when they see me deviate from those, just as I will call them when I see them deviating. But just that two-way authenticity, I think, has proven to help me and my teams historically.
Eric, thank you. Folks, really appreciate your time. I got a lot out of this. Ownership mindset, authenticity, believe in your people, getting comfortable being uncomfortable, have a positive belief system, do stuff. Is really good, honest feedback on what it takes to be a leader. So panel, really appreciate it. Hopefully we could do this in person over a beverage someday, but thank you for being a part of this. I'll turn it back over to Mike, Amber, and Sophia.
Thank you guys so much. Great panel, great discussion. I want to ask you one follow-up question just before you duck out, though. There was a great one in the chat that was about finding a mentor. Can you really quick talk about like who inspires you or who you look for at advice? I think that gets tougher the higher you go up the ladder, but I'm sure all of you had somebody in your life that was impactful or helped you up the ladder in this climb.
I think names are unimportant. I think it's the process. The process is don't wait. You go find somebody who you admire and it's not just one. I mean, this person has certain skills in this area. There's certain skills in that area. And then you go befriend them, and then you ask for their advice, and you be very aggressive about it. It's the process more than the actual person.
I don't think you can outsource your career development to someone else, right? You need to take ownership of that. And I think that means I don't want a mentor assigned to me. I want to go find a mentor that I connect with, right? Like, so anything that's assigned to me, I'm going to dismiss, right? But I had, one of my early CEOs turned out to be hugely impactful and the kind of person I've become. And now 20 years later, I still talk to him every quarter, because I still value the perspective that he has in the context for our relationship. So don't outsource your career development, find your own mentor. People want to help.
Tracey?
I would say, to be honest with you, a huge mentor of mine is my mother. So I still go back to her. She is just an amazing lady. Back in the 70s, she was a mainframe computer programmer that just gave me the drive to get outside of my comfort zone. And so I ask her questions, whether she truly knows what I'm, really referring to. I still think she gives me the best advice.
Awesome. Eric?
Yeah, for me, probably two. I had a sales leader, and he's still a very close friend, that I just found someone that I could model behaviors after. I saw somebody whose behaviors kept consistently driving to great outcomes, and he behaved in the right way, in a way that was in line with my values. And so he got, whether he wanted to or not, he became my mentor, and he also became one of my best friends, which I think sometimes happens. And then, it's interesting, Tracey mentioned her mom. I'm very fortunate. My dad is 81 and still works 40 hours a week. And believe it or not, he's a sales leader. And so I still bounce everything off of him, and feel so blessed that I'm able to do that.
Same. What about you, Pete?
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. Like, my belief system definitely came from my parents too. And when Tracey said that, I would have said the same thing. My dad has always made me believe I could do whatever I wanted to do, and it was just his belief in me that allowed me to try to keep getting better and make him proud. So also I spent 3 days with Jock couple months ago, and that was a phenomenal experience. He's a great leader. Anybody wants to join me next year, I'm going to do it again. Just link in with me, and I'll tell you how that can happen. But that was an amazing experience too. And then Mattson always picks up the phone when I call him. So he's definitely been a mentor to me as well.